The wind howled through the empty streets, carrying with it the weight of a world divided. Amid the darkness, a solitary figure stood firm against the rising tide of hatred that had begun to sweep over the land. Clad in black, this mysterious rider wasn't just a symbol of defiance. He was a living, breathing force for change. Every inch of him radiated strength, resilience, and a burning desire to challenge the injustice that plagued his world. His name, not many knew. His story, it was still unfolding, but it was clear that this man would not be silenced. Not by fear, not by hate. In a world where divisions seemed to be growing stronger every day, this Black Rider was a beacon of hope. He had witnessed the cruelty firsthand, the hurtful words, the violent acts, the systemic oppression that no one could ignore. And when it seemed like everyone had turned their backs, when it felt like society was on the verge of collapse, this rider rose. Not just to fight back, but to inspire others to stand with him. To show the world that love, unity, and change were still possible. But it wasn't easy. Standing against hate was never going to be a simple task. There were those who wished to silence him, to tear down the very ideals he stood for. The riders, the ones who perpetuated the darkness, the ones who thrived on chaos and division, they were everywhere. They watched, waited, and struck whenever they could. And yet, in the face of their hatred, the Black Rider stood tall. He never wavered. His heart, like the beating of a drum, called for justice and equality. His mind, sharp and unwavering, knew that the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was one he had no choice but to walk. In a small town that had been torn apart by these deep-rooted issues, the Black Rider made his stand. He didn't come in with violence or aggression. He didn't need to. His mere presence was enough to send a message that echoed louder than any weapon ever could. People started to listen. They started to see the truth in his actions, the passion in his eyes. He was more than a rider on a horse. He was the voice of a generation that had been ignored, a leader whose words and deeds would be remembered. But not everyone was convinced. In fact, some were determined to break his spirit. They saw the Black Rider as a threat, a symbol of change they weren't ready for. And so they plotted. They whispered in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. The tension in the town grew with every passing day. People were torn between supporting this mysterious figure and succumbing to the pressure of the hateful forces that wanted him gone. The questions hung heavy in the air. Would the Black Rider's unwavering courage be enough to overcome the hate? Could one person really inspire change in a world so deeply entrenched in division? The weight of those questions pressed on the rider's shoulders, but he did not falter. He kept moving forward, trusting that his mission was greater than the fear that sought to bind him. He knew the stakes were high, but he also knew that if he didn't stand now, if he didn't fight for what was right, the world would only grow darker. And then, just when it seemed like the tension would boil over, something unexpected happened. A group of children who had been raised in a world of hatred and separation approached the Black Rider. They had seen him, heard his message, and something within them shifted. They had questions. They had doubts. But most of all, they had hope. In the simplest of ways, they wanted to be a part of the change he was so fiercely advocating for. They were ready to stand by him, not just as followers, but as the future of a world that was begging for a shift. But as the day wore on, a shadow cast over this hopeful moment. In the distance, a new rider appeared. Clad in red, he moved with purpose, his eyes fixed on the Black Rider. This was no ordinary enemy. This was someone who understood the power of influence, the weight of leadership. This rider wasn't just trying to defeat the Black Rider. He was trying to break the very spirit that had given birth to the movement. With every step, the stakes grew higher. The future of the town, and perhaps the future of many others, hung in the balance. Could the Black Rider keep his resolve? Would the children's newfound hope be enough to fuel his mission? Or would the forces of hate and division prove too strong? The clash between these two riders wasn't just a battle of strength. It was a battle for the soul of a community, for the heart of a movement that had only just begun. The winds of change were swirling, but would they be enough to break the chains that bound so many? As the Red Rider approached, the Black Rider's heart pounded in his chest. His hand tightened around the reins, his mind racing. This wasn't just another fight. This was the moment of truth. This was where everything could change, or where everything could fall apart. And then the ground beneath them trembled, the world holding its breath, as the two riders stared each other down, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The Black Rider knew this would be the defining moment. But what would happen next? Would he break through the walls of hate, or would this be his final stand? The tension between the two riders was palpable, a standoff that felt like it could ignite at any moment. The wind picked up, swirling around them as though it, too, was waiting for the inevitable clash. But beneath the surface of this showdown, the story ran much deeper, far beyond just the two figures facing each other on horseback. The Black Rider wasn't born into this fight. He had been a simple man, a man who lived in the very town now consumed by hatred. He grew up surrounded by love, community, and the belief that people could rise above the struggles of the world. But life had a way of challenging those ideals. As he got older, he saw the cracks in the system, the way people were divided by the color of their skin, their beliefs, their backgrounds. The hateful words were subtle at first, whispers in the corners, then louder, until they became the foundation of how people saw each other. The very town he once loved had become a battleground. His turning point came on one cold, unforgiving night. A group of young men, filled with rage and prejudice, attacked a family simply because of the color of their skin. The violence was brutal, and the consequences devastating. But it wasn't the physical wounds that cut the deepest. It was the emotional toll it took on the community. People looked away, pretending nothing had happened, afraid to stand up because of the fear of retaliation. But the Black Rider couldn't ignore it. His heart bled for the injustice, and he knew he couldn't sit idly by any longer. That's when he decided to act. No longer would he allow hate to go unchecked. He donned his black attire, symbolizing the strength and resolve within him. It was a shield, but also a reminder of the darkness that threatened to overtake the world. The Black Rider didn't carry a sword or a gun. His weapon was his will, his spirit, his ability to inspire those around him to find courage. It wasn't long before the town began to notice him, his calm demeanor in the face of danger, his unwavering belief that people could change. Slowly but surely, he became a symbol of resistance. Not a fighter with fists, but a fighter with ideas. But not everyone was ready for this change. The Red Rider, the one now approaching from the distance, represented the very forces of division that had been festering in the shadows. His arrival wasn't an accident. It was a calculated move. He was no stranger to the ways of manipulation and control. He had once been a leader in his own right, someone who had garnered power by exploiting fear and resentment. He had seen what the Black Rider was doing, and it scared him. It scared him because he knew how powerful the idea of unity could be. The Red Rider's name was Lucius. He had been born in a world much like the Black Rider's, one full of hope, one that believed change was possible. But Lucius had lost faith. He had watched as the world shifted around him, and in his frustration, he had embraced the darkness that promised to offer him the control he craved. He didn't care about the suffering of others. He cared only about maintaining power. And when he saw the Black Rider gaining influence, Lucius knew that his reign was in jeopardy. He had to stop him before the light of hope grew too bright. Lucius wasn't alone in his mission. Behind him, a silent army of followers, those who shared his beliefs, waited in the shadows. They had been carefully orchestrated, their hate deep-rooted and ingrained. These were the people who had been consumed by fear, by the belief that division was the only way to protect their way of life. And Lucius knew they were the key to defeating the Black Rider. His plan was simple: destroy the symbol of hope, eliminate the movement, and crush any spark of unity before it could spread further. The Black Rider had faced many challenges in his journey, but he had never encountered anyone quite like Lucius. This was no ordinary enemy. Lucius was clever, ruthless, and strategic. He understood the game being played, and now the stage was set for their final confrontation. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the land, the Black Rider turned his attention back to the approaching figure. Lucius' eyes were locked onto his, cold and calculating, as if he were studying him. The two of them knew that this moment would define everything, who would emerge victorious, and who would be left in the dust of history. But the stakes were higher than just a personal battle. As the Black Rider stood his ground, he thought about the people he had fought for, the children who now saw the possibility of a different world, the families who had begun to rebuild their sense of community. This fight wasn't just his anymore. It was everyone's. And the fear that gnawed at his insides was not for himself, but for the future of the town, the future of all the people who had placed their trust in him. He didn't want to fail them. And as if on cue, the first move was made. Lucius spurred his horse forward, his expression unchanged, the ground beneath his steed's hooves thundering in the stillness of the evening. The Black Rider waited, holding his ground, but his heart was racing. This wasn't just about strength. This was about the power of belief, the power of hope. The moment they met, the world seemed to pause. Lucius' first words cut through the air like a blade. "You can't fight the darkness forever, Rider. It always wins." But the Black Rider didn't flinch. His reply was simple, yet powerful: "Not if we stand together." And with that, the battle for the soul of the town began. But as the two riders collided in the midst of a fierce clash, something else was unfolding on the outskirts of the town. Something that would change everything. Stay tuned. The sounds of hooves pounding against the earth echoed through the town as the Black Rider and Lucius collided, their horses skidding to a halt. It wasn't just a battle of strength, it was a war of ideals, a fight for the future of everyone who had ever been crushed by the weight of division. Lucius struck first, his whip snapping through the air with a deadly precision, aiming to break the Black Rider's spirit. But the Black Rider didn't flinch. He ducked, rolled off his horse, and sprang to his feet with a swift fluidity that surprised even Lucius. This wasn't just a fight to win. It was a fight for something much bigger. Around them, the townspeople gathered, forming a wide circle as the two figures faced off. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, each person unsure of how this moment would unfold. Would the Black Rider's belief in unity be enough to break the grip of fear that had held the town for so long? Or would Lucius, with his ruthless determination, prove that hate was an unshakable force? Lucius lunged forward with a fierce swing of his sword, but the Black Rider parried it effortlessly, his eyes never leaving his opponent. The battle was intense, each move calculated, each blow delivered with precision. But in the back of his mind, the Black Rider kept hearing the voices of the children he had inspired, the families who had stood by him, the people who believed in the possibility of change. He couldn't let them down. As the two continued their struggle, something shifted in the crowd. What had started as a silent gathering of bystanders began to change as people in the crowd started to speak out. "We don't want this anymore," a voice shouted from the back of the crowd. We want unity. Another voice joined in. We stand with him. For the first time, the Black Rider realized that the battle wasn't just between him and Lucius. It was between the people who wanted to break free from the chains of hatred and those who sought to keep them shackled. The true power lay in the collective will of the people. Just as Lucius seemed poised to deliver a final blow, the Black Rider reached inside himself, summoning the strength he had cultivated through every hardship, every struggle. He dodged Lucius' strike and, with one swift motion, disarmed him. But instead of finishing the fight, he stepped back, looking at Lucius not with anger, but with understanding. "This doesn't have to end in violence," he said, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "We can build something better together." For a long moment, Lucius stared at him, his chest heaving with the effort of the fight. The rage in his eyes started to soften, a flicker of doubt creeping into his heart. Was it possible? Was there another way? But before Lucius could answer, a loud crash interrupted them. From the crowd, a group of Lucius followers charged forward, their faces twisted with anger, eager to continue the fight. But as they moved toward the Black Rider, something unexpected happened. The townspeople, people who had once been silent, afraid to stand up, stepped forward, forming a protective barrier between the Black Rider and the mob. "Not this time," one of them said, his voice steady. "We've had enough." The moment stretched on, the conflict hanging in the air like a thick fog. But then slowly, the crowd of Lucius followers began to hesitate. They looked at the faces of the people they had once feared, saw the strength in their unity, and realized something. This wasn't just about power. It was about truth. And the truth was that hatred had never been the answer. Lucius, exhausted and defeated, dropped to his knees. The fight had left him, replaced by a sense of realization. Perhaps the world didn't have to stay divided. Perhaps the future could be different. But it was the people who would have to change, not just the Black Rider. As Lucius surrendered, the tension in the air finally broke. The crowd erupted in cheers, but it wasn't the kind of cheer that comes with victory. It was the cheer of hope, of people reclaiming their futures, of a community that had found its voice again. The Black Rider stood tall, but his heart swelled with gratitude, not for the fight he had won, but for the change he had ignited in others. Days passed, and the town began to heal. The walls of division that had once kept people apart started to crumble brick by brick. The Black Rider became a symbol, not of a lone fighter, but of a collective movement. His presence inspired conversations, debates, and most importantly, action. People began to look at one another differently. They started to see the value in unity, in embracing what made them different instead of letting it drive them apart. The Black Rider had sparked a fire, but it was the people who kept it burning. Lucius, for his part, wasn't forgotten. He didn't vanish into the shadows, but instead he began his own journey, a journey of reflection, of understanding the true cost of hate. It wasn't an easy road, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but the seeds of change had been planted. And in time, even he would begin to see that redemption wasn't just about winning battles. It was about finding a new way forward. The town, once torn apart by fear, had been transformed. The Black Rider had succeeded in what many thought impossible. Not with fists, but with the power of his beliefs, with the strength of the people he had inspired. And as the Black Rider rode away, his silhouette fading into the horizon, he knew the battle wasn't over. Change was a long road, but he was no longer walking it alone. The story of the Black Rider didn't end that day. It had only just begun. And as the town moved forward, they would always remember that one man had stood up against hate and had inspired them to rise together. It was a victory not just for one person, but for everyone who believed in the power of unity, hope, and change. and that in the end was the most powerful weapon of all.